I think music theory is a weak point for a lot of engineers. Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about some basic music theory and dive into key signatures and the circle of fifths. So I might be a little biased here because I went to a 4-year program that had a heavy emphasis on music theory. So one of my degrees was basically a music composition degree with additional tech courses, and I think we were only missing 1 or 2 composition courses that the music composition kids did at the end of their program, but it's been a while, so I could be wrong. But anyway, I've definitely noticed during my work in studios and with other engineers that music theory seems to be a weak point for a lot of engineers. And I know at least one big studio in town that has a degree program that doesn't even teach any music theory to its students, or at least they didn't when I worked there. So I think that's a big mistake. There are so many times while working on music that even a basic knowledge of music theory could be used to improve the composition of a piece. And maybe you're not working with artists that would necessarily be receptive to an engineer suggesting compositional changes, and that's fine. You don't always need to be involved with that. But wouldn't you like to sound knowledgeable and have some good ideas and suggestions if someone does ask you for your opinions on how to improve a piece? Or maybe you're just working on your own music, in which case that's great. You can have more control and potentially make it even better with a working knowledge of music theory. So with that said, I'll crack open my old textbooks and we can get started with these basics. So I like to start at the beginning so I don't lose anyone. So let's start by talking about the major and minor scales. First, let's look at the keys of a piano so we can easily visualize what we're talking about. Now, our key signature tells us which major or minor key we are currently in for a piece, and that tells us which notes we can play and still be within that key signature. Now, you can have a note in a piece of music that lies outside of the given key signature, but that's called an accidental, and if you're getting technical, there are rules that tell us when and how often we can or should use an accidental, but more on that later. Any major scale is created by picking a starting note. You then follow a pattern for how many whole and half steps to take while going up in pitch from that starting note. So a whole or half step in music is often described by how we view the keys on the piano. So a half step is the distance from one note to another on the keyboard, and that includes the black keys as well. The half step is equal to the jump in pitch that you take whenever you jump a semitone. It's the difference between any note in Western music and the closest next note on the scale, including a sharp or a flat. So, for example, a half step is taken when we play a C and then play a C sharp. A half step is also taken when we play an A and then an A flat. A half step is also taken when we go from a B to a C or from an E to an F, since there are no flats or sharps between a B and a C or an E and an F. And on a side note, in the interest of being thorough for anyone that's a total beginner here, we have multiple ways of describing some of these flat and sharp notes, since these black keys on the piano that correspond to a flat or a sharp note can either be called by the name of the note that's to their left, combined with a sharp denoter, or we can call it by the name of the note that's to the right of the black key, combined with a flat denoter. So, for example, you can call the black key between the A and B on a piano either an A sharp, or you can call it a B flat. Anyway, so that basically covers what a half step is. So a whole step is just 2 half steps. So excluding our exceptions like the distance between E and F and the distance between B and C, which are half steps, a whole step is often the distance between 2 white keys on the piano. And that's just because it takes 2 half steps to cover that distance. So if we start at C and take a half step, that brings us to C sharp. If we take another half step, that takes us to a D. So the distance between C and D is a whole step. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Okay, so to create a major scale, we pick our starting note and then follow the formula of whole and half steps, and that tells us which notes are in that major scale. This formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if we start on a C and follow this formula, then we know the C major scale will include all the white keys on the keyboard and only those keys or notes. This is one of the simpler major scales that's easy to remember. However, if we start on B flat, then we will find that the B flat major scale consists of B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, and then back up to B flat if we want to complete the octave. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions. In a similar fashion, to get a minor scale, we use the formula of taking a whole step followed by a half, then whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Just follow that formula to get a minor scale for any starting note. Minor scales sound darker and sadder than major scales, and major scales sound brighter, happier, and cheerier. So which one you choose to use can depend very much on the emotion you're trying to convey. And you might have already noticed that the formula for a minor scale is very similar to that of a major scale. It's just as if it has a different starting point from the same formula. So because of this, it might not be a surprise to you that each major scale has a relative minor. The relative minor scale for any major scale is simply the minor scale that has the same exact notes within it as the major scale. So, for example, for the C major scale, which, if you remember from earlier, has all the white keys on the piano and only the white keys, that has a relative minor of A minor, because if you follow the formula, A minor also uses all the white keys and only the white keys. Each major scale, or key, has a relative minor. And that's why when we get into key signatures in a minute here, we will see that we denote what major or minor key we are in using a key signature. The key signature itself will be the same between a major key and its relative minor. The key signature narrows it down to one of those two, but the key signature by itself does not specify whether we are in the major key or the minor key. When you get more into musical analysis, you will find out that you use the actual music, the notes of the piece, and their order and organization to determine which of the two is being used by any given piece of music. You can determine what the relative minor is for any major key by counting from the base of the major key as 1, and then count 6 notes up until you arrive at the relative minor. So for C major, we could go C, D, E, F, G, A. So A minor is the relative minor for C major. If the 6th note is flat or sharp within the major key, then it's also flat or sharp when describing the relative minor. For example, the key of A major has a relative minor of F sharp minor, since F is the 6th note in A major and F is sharp in the key of A major. On a side note, the parallel minor for any given major key is the minor key that shares the same start note, also called the tonic. So G major has a parallel minor of G minor, but its relative minor is E minor. We also tend to write the major keys with capitalized letters, and we write the minor keys with lowercase letters. Okay, now that we understand that, we can understand key signatures. The key signature tells us which major or minor scale combo we are currently using. The key signature itself lives on the far left of the musical staff, and it has little sharps or flats to denote which key signature we're using. Key signatures usually contain either only sharp symbols placed on the staff, or they will contain nothing but flat symbols, but not a combination of the two. One reason why there's not generally a combination of the two is because remember how we discussed that you can describe any given black key on the piano as either some sort of a flat or some sort of a sharp? They each have 2 potential names. So yeah, to read the key signature, just look at those symbols, and where they are located on the staff will tell you what flats or sharps are in that key. You can then deduce what key you're in based on the notes that the key signature tells you. So we talked about the key of B flat earlier and how it contains B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, and A. So the key signature for B flat tells us that it contains natural notes, except for the 2 flats depicted on the key signature, which happen to be B flat and E flat. Similarly, when we use the whole and half-step formula to determine the notes in the G major scale, we will find that it contains all natural notes except for F sharp. So logically, the key signature for the key of G major contains 1 sharp symbol on F. So that's pretty logical and straightforward, I think, but then how do you simply look at a key signature and just know what key you're looking at? That's a pretty important skill to have if you want to be able to quickly and efficiently communicate with trained musicians. Well, there are some tricks to memorizing this. Basically, the way I do this is if the key signature contains sharps, then I look at the last sharp in the key signature and I go 1 note up on the staff from that, and that's the name of the key. So we spoke about how G major has only 1 F sharp, so I would look at that F sharp and look at the next note up, which is G, and then I would know that I'm looking at the key signature for G major. Similarly, when I look at the key signature for the key of D major, the last sharp that we see is C sharp. When we go 1 note up, that brings us to D. So I then know that it's the key signature for D major. And just like when we were talking about relative minors, if we look at the key signature and determine that the bass note for the key is flat or sharp, then we also mention that when describing the key. So for example, when we look at the key signature for F sharp major, we see that the last sharp in the key signature is an E sharp. So then we go 1 note up to F. But if we look at the key signature, it also tells us that F is sharp. So we then know that we are looking at the key signature for F sharp major. If the key signature contains flats, then I remember which key it is by looking at the second to last flat in the key signature. So, for example, the second to last flat in the key signature for E flat major is an E flat. The second to last flat in the key of A flat major is A flat, so that's that. With this trick though, you just have to remember that F major is the key that has only one flat, since there is no second to last flat to look at. We also just have to memorize that if there are no flats or sharps in a key signature, then we are looking at C major or its relative minor, A minor. And that makes sense since we talked about earlier how C major only contains the white notes on the piano, no flats or sharps. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. So finally, I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to give you a really basic intro to the circle of fifths, and I'll have to do a more thorough video on just the circle of fifths later. So I'll put an image of the circle of fifths up on the screen for you so you can look at it while I explain what it is. Basically, the circle of fifths is a tool that us music nerds use to keep all of this stuff organized in our heads. It shows us the relationship between each of the 12 tones in the chromatic scale and the key signatures that correspond to them. The circle of fifths almost always starts with C major at the top of the circle, and then as you travel around the circle, it either adds sharps or flats to each key signature as you go around the circle, depending on the direction that you go. You'll also see that it confirms what I've been telling you guys about my tricks for determining the key based on the key signature and determining the relative minor based on the major key. You might have also already noticed that as we travel around the circle of fifths clockwise, the first note or the bass note of each key, which is called the tonic in music theory, is a fifth away from the previous key. So if we start at C major and count 5 notes up on the scale, C, D, E, F, G, then we arrive at G, which is the next key in the circle of fifths as we go clockwise. The fifth note or scale degree in a given scale is also called the dominant in music theory. So there you go, it's all connected. Going counterclockwise around the circle, we travel in fourths, which is why it's sometimes, but much less often, called the circle of fourths. So anyway, the circle of fifths is a great tool for composers, and it's good to have an understanding of it if you're going to be working with music. It's one of the most basic and central things to understand in the world of music theory. There's so much more to it than what I got into here, but I'm going to run out of time here, so I will add to my list for future videos that I should do a more thorough video on the circle of fifths. But at least now we know that everyone here knows the basics that you need to understand to arrive at the circle of fifths, and you've now seen it, so we can build from there. So more on that later, and wow, I didn't bust out my textbooks at all for this. I did a more thorough and didn't get as in-depth as I thought I was gonna. Which might be a good thing. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. But that's it. And the other thing is, let's see. I might make a circle of fifths poster for you guys, and I'll have, if I do, there'll be a link in the description to where you can get it. Cool, so that's basically it. This is a really basic intro to these concepts, and of course there's stuff that I haven't even touched on yet. So I think I'll have to do another music theory video at some point for you guys. But I hope you guys liked this video, and please let me know what you think in the comments below. For today's question, I want to know, what do you struggle with the most in terms of music theory, and what do you want to learn about in that department? So please leave your answers in the comments below. And thanks guys. As usual, if you like this video, please tell your friends about my channel, watch my other videos, or check out my Patreon. I'll be coming out with new videos every other Wednesday, and thanks for watching. Okay. I've been taking weekly sign language classes, which has been a lot of fun, but it might not be the most useful skill for an audio engineer to have, but I'm not really worried about that. I think it's fun, so. Purple mustache. Purple mustache. Maybe not. Okay. What other stories I have? Send me free stuff, please. Yeah. Don't know what to say.